Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to dive in a loose, easygoing painting with ink and watercolor. I've done many ink and marker drawings, but this is my first video mixing ink and watercolor on this channel. I thought it would be fun to try something different, and I hope it creates a calming, relaxed experience, so we can just enjoy the flow and not worry too much about the final result. Every time I start a new painting, I try to learn something new. Recently, I'm taking a Skillshare class called Watercolor Workout Basics and Beyond by Robert Joyner, and it is fantastic. The class covers a lot of watercolor basics and has some really fun projects. One of my favorites was painting this teacup. I highly recommend this class for anyone who loves watercolor. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. If you are new to it, Skillshare is an amazing online learning community for creatives, with thousands of classes across fields like fine art, graphic design, photography, animation, and so much more. I use Skillshare to explore new skills, like graphic design and digital drawing. The classes are structured into short, easy-to-follow lessons, so you can learn at your own pace and revisit concepts as needed. Seeing different artists' perspectives really helps me expand my styles. Whether you are looking to pick up a new hobby or advance your skills, Skillshare has something for everyone, from beginner to pros. It's a great community to find inspiration, learn directly from experts. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. Without further ado, let's start our painting. I'll be using Winsor Newton 20 color set for this painting, a water container and a cloth nearby for drying my brush. The paper I'm using is 100% cotton, cold pressed. You can find all my art supply details in the description box. For this piece, I'll be using a reference photo. My friend took this photo in Marysville, California. You can download this photo from my website. In my other videos, I usually draw from imagination, or if I look at some picture for ideas, I like to change things around and create a new scene. That approach takes a lot more time and practice, with many draft sketches to design a good composition and decide what to include in the drawing. But today, I'm keeping it simple by staying close to the photo. I'm still exploring and relearning watercolor myself, so using a reference photo will be a great way for us to focus on watercolor technique without worrying about the composition too much. This photo has a straightforward angle, but we can notice a bit of perspective. Since the building is tall and it was shot from a low angle and close distance, the top edge appears narrower than the base. When drawing the building's vertical edges, make sure they are tilted slightly inward. I don't recommend using a thick pencil for the outline stage. Here I'm making it more visible for the camera. Try to keep it light so it doesn't damage your watercolor paper's texture. Drawing a building from the front angle is straightforward, but when there are many windows and the structure details, it can take some time in the outline stage. I'm feeling pretty relaxed with this piece. I know it won't be perfect, and my main goal here is to practice. But it's worth spending a bit more time on the outline stage to create a strong foundation. My drawing ended up a little tilted because I didn't double check my pencil outline. When drawing a building from the front angle, even in a loose style, it's helpful to keep the windows roughly spaced apart. Otherwise, they can easily look off balance. Those drawings need to simplify details, but it's still important to preserve certain elements, like these keystones here. Each window has an arch with a keystone on the top. Adding small details like this makes the drawing look more interesting and complete. Without these, the structure can end up looking a little flat. Once you finish the pencil outline, we will start adding line work. Personally, I don't prefer using fine liners on watercolor paper, but I don't have waterproof ink for my fountain pen at the moment. If your ink isn't waterproof, that's okay. It can actually create some interesting effects when it blends with watercolor, but sometimes it can get a bit messy if we are not careful. So today I'm sticking with a fine liner. I'm using a size 8 pen, which I normally don't use for my mock drawings. But with thick watercolor paper, a larger size of fine liner will flow more smoothly. For this tree, I'm drawing small curved lines to build up its form. I don't feel too nervous during the outline stage like I used to. When I work with markers, I often find myself worrying about making mistakes. But for this drawing, I'm embracing a more relaxed approach. I usually suggest varying line thickness by adjusting the pressure on the paper. But since the fine liner is kind of pointy and the watercolor paper has a rough texture, I'm using a light medium pressure to avoid damaging the fine liner and the paper. Remember, our line work doesn't need to be perfect. It's more about capturing the essence of the scene. The colors will bring everything together later, so don't stress, just enjoy the process. Now let's dive into the fun part. I didn't tape down my paper because it lets me move my painting around easily to fit a camera. However, taping your paper can help it dry flat. Mine does get slightly distorted as it dries, but nothing too drastic, and if your paper ends up warped, there are some ways to make it flat afterward, so feel free to tape your paper or skip that step. I will start with a wet on dry technique for the first layer of tree color. Then before that layer dries, I will switch to a wet on wet technique to add dark values for a smooth blend. It's hard to see from the top-down angle on camera, but my paper starts to warp a bit, and that's completely normal. In the past, I used to think that if my paper was distorted, I must have done something wrong, like using too much water. In this photo, you can see that the building has some faded color areas. To achieve that effect, I clean my brush, load it with a bit of water, and gently brush over certain areas to lift and move the pigment around. Some spot might end up with a water stain, but that's what I'm aiming for. For the sky, I could have brushed on some water first to help create softer edges, but I think it turned out fine without it. For the trees in the background, I mixed a muted green to help them appear further away and not compete with the tree in the foreground. Now that the first layer is still slightly wet, I'm going to start adding shadows. For the shadow on the ground, I choose to use a warm tone to reflect the environmental color influenced by the red building. When adding shadows to the tree crown, I use a little less water and more pigment. Since this tree is in the foreground, I want its texture to be more defined, to enhance the overall depth of this drawing. As I layer colors on the building, I'm still using quite a bit of water, so the edges of new layers blend gently with the previous one, rather than appearing too sharp. I made a mistake when drawing this shadow. I intended to create a dark area with a crisp edge, but I didn't wait for the light area to dry, so the dark pigment spread into it. That was a bit frustrating, especially since a section of the paper started to warp and peel. I wasn't sure what to do at that moment, so I decided to shift my focus to other areas. I know I can always come back to fix it later. After I tried to repaint it unsuccessfully, I added more water to wash out the area and used a tissue to lift away the pigment and water. I did feel quite discouraged at the moment. In the past, I would have just given up and started a new piece. But now I've learned that pushing through each mistake and finishing the drawing often teaches me far more than starting over. It helps me figure out how to correct errors and has taught me to embrace my mistakes, which often become unnoticeable once the whole drawing is complete. So if you are experiencing the same thing, remember that it's perfectly okay to make mistakes. They just add a little twist to your story. Stay patient. I'm using a brush pen to define some edges, but it's not a very good idea on this painting. It turned out too strong. Thankfully, I can always go back and use white paint to fix it later. The shadow area under the shade looks a bit flat right now, but once we use white paint to draw reflections and highlights, it will definitely come together much better. Different types of white paint actually have different levels of coverage. For example, the paint marker I was using earlier is less opaque than the white paint I'm using right now. Sometimes you might not want a strong highlight in certain areas, like under the shade, so a low coverage white paint can be a good choice. However, keep in mind that you don't need to buy different types of highlight pens. It's not a requirement. There are many ways to work around with just one highlight pen. The top edge of the shade is quite dark and stand out a bit too much. I'm using the white paint to tone it down, along with some water to wash out the pigment. If you happen to have a yellow paint marker, you can use it to draw the lights, but that's completely optional. You can also use watercolor paint directly without adding any water to achieve the same effect. Feel free to keep adding details as you like, but I'm going to leave it like this. Whether you follow along with me or just enjoying watching, I would love to hear about your watercolor experience, so let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave a comment, and we'll see you in the next video.